The 16th of February 2011, a Wednesday evening in Goldthorpe, a former mining village in South Yorkshire, the kind of place where front doors open onto terraced streets, where neighbours know each other's routines, and where an ordinary evening at home carries no particular weight. Mark Lackenby had his night arranged exactly as he wanted it. Tea on the table when he came in, beers in the fridge, a Champions League match on the television, Arsenal versus Barcelona. He had placed a bet on the outcome. The terms of that bet required Arsenal to win and required Robin van Persie to score the opening goal. His partner, Gemma Coates, went upstairs to have a bath. She left him on the sofa. Beside him, in the living room, was their daughter Ruby. She was 5 weeks old. At 8 minutes past 8 that evening, the match kicked off. At 11 minutes past 8, David Villa scored for Barcelona. Somewhere in the minutes that followed, Ruby began to cry. She never recovered from what happened next. Ruby Lackenby was brought to Barnsley Hospital that night with catastrophic injuries to her brain. She was transferred to Sheffield Children's Hospital. 24 hours later, the machines keeping her alive were switched off. She was 5.5 weeks old. Her father told paramedics she had simply stopped breathing. He was lying. This is the story of Ruby Lackenby, and the night her father lost his temper with a football match and a 5-week-old baby at the same time. Now, if this is your first time here, I'm really glad you found this channel. Every day I dive deep into real criminal cases, breaking them down piece by piece so we can actually understand what happened and why. If that sounds like something you'd be into, go ahead and hit subscribe. It's free and it means a lot. Okay, now let's get back to the case. Ruby Lackenby was 5.5 weeks old. There is very little that can be said about a life so short, and that absence is itself part of what makes this case so difficult to sit with. Ruby had no history to speak of, no personality that had fully formed, no stories that friends and colleagues could share after the fact. She had a name. She had parents. She had 5 weeks of life in a terraced house in Goldthorpe, and she had people who, at least in some capacity, were supposed to be keeping her safe. Her mother was Gemma Coates, 31 years old. She had been in a relationship with Mark Lackenby for some time before Ruby was born. By the accounts of those around them, the couple's relationship was not an easy one. Lackenby had 3 children from a previous relationship. Ruby was his 4th child, and his first with Gemma. At Sheffield Crown Court, the judge, Mr. Justice Haddon Cave, asked a question that he said remained a mystery to him even after hearing all of the evidence. He asked what it was that could have caused a man to be so cruel to his own daughter. He offered 3 possibilities, framed as questions rather than conclusions. Was it, he asked, that Ruby was simply one child too many? Was it the weight of responsibility that had come with starting again? Or was it the disruption of one relationship ending and another beginning, with all of the pressure that brings? He did not answer those questions. He said he could not. What he could say, and did say directly to Lackenby, was that Lackenby would have to bear the guilt and the loss of his own child at his own hand for the rest of his life. Ruby had 5 weeks. She deserved considerably more. Mark Lackenby was 32 years old at the time of Ruby's death. He lived in Goldthorpe, South Yorkshire, a community that had been shaped, like many in the region, by the decline of the coal industry and the long shadow it had left behind. He was not a man who had attracted significant official attention before the night of the 16th of February. He was, by the accounts of people who knew him, someone who presented as a capable and caring father to his 3 older children from his previous relationship. That is a detail worth pausing on because it appeared in court and was noted by the judge. Witnesses had spoken of Lackenby as a loving and caring parent. The judge acknowledged those accounts, but he also said, directly, that those accounts had to be set alongside what the evidence showed, that Ruby had been harmed more than once before the night she died, and that the pattern of behavior toward her told a different story to the one his character witnesses described. Lackenby's relationship with Gemma Coates was the context in which Ruby came into the world. Coates was 31, and the couple had been together for some time. What the dynamic between them was like inside the home is not fully captured in the public record of the trial. What is clear is that on the evening of the 16th of February, Coates was upstairs having a bath when the critical events took place downstairs. She was not present. She did not witness what happened to her daughter. After the event, Coates was arrested and charged with perverting the course of justice. The charge was connected to questions about what she knew and when, and about whether she had done anything to obstruct the investigation. After a 3-week trial at Sheffield Crown Court, she was found not guilty on that charge. What the trial also established was a pattern of behavior by Lackenby toward Ruby that had begun before the night of the 16th of February. He had caused her serious injuries on a previous occasion. The jury was asked to consider both what had happened on the night of the match and what had happened before it. The injuries Ruby Lackenby sustained on the night of the 16th of February did not emerge from nowhere. They were the most serious in a pattern that the court found had already begun. In the weeks before that night, Ruby had been taken to a medical professional. An examination had revealed that she had fractured ribs. These injuries had not been caused by the events of the 16th. They predated them. The prosecution argued, and the jury accepted, that the broken ribs had been caused by Lackenby handling Ruby with excessive and harmful force on a separate occasion from the fatal night. The significance of this is considerable. It means that by the time Mark Lackenby sat down to watch the Champions League match on the evening of the 16th, he had already harmed his daughter once, in a way that left her with broken bones. Ruby was 5 weeks old. Her ribs had already been fractured, and she was placed beside him on the sofa while her mother went upstairs. The Crown Prosecution Service lawyer, Sue Steeples, described the scene at the house that evening in precise terms when speaking after the verdict. She said, "Lackenby had his night planned. Tea on the table, beers in the fridge, football on the television, a bet placed on the outcome, everything arranged for an evening he had been looking forward to. Ruby was beside him on the sofa. Her mother was in the bath, and the match that Lackenby had staked money on was about to begin." The judge, Mr. Justice Haddon Cave, described the tragic incident as the result of a nasty outbreak of temper, and identified it as part of a growing pattern of abusive behavior toward Ruby. He said Lackenby had to confront what it meant that his daughter had been in his care on more than one occasion and had been harmed on more than one occasion. The pattern matters because it removes the possibility of a single moment of inexplicable behavior. What happened on the night of the 16th of February was not a man who had never harmed a child suddenly snapping without warning. It was, the court found, a continuation. The Champions League match between Arsenal and Barcelona kicked off at 8 minutes past 8 in the evening on the 16th of February 2011. It was broadcast live on British television. Lackenby was watching it from his sofa in Goldthorpe. Ruby was beside him. At 8:11, 3 minutes into the match, David Villa scored for Barcelona. It was not the result Lackenby had bet on. His stake had required Arsenal to win and had specified that Robin van Persie would score the opening goal. None of that was going to happen now. What occurred in the minutes that followed is known in its outcome, though not in its precise detail, because there was no witness other than Lackenby himself, and Lackenby denied throughout that he had harmed Ruby at all. What is known, because the medical evidence established it beyond question, is that Ruby suffered a catastrophic brain injury that night while in his sole care. The Crown Prosecution Service's position, stated publicly after the verdict, was that when a goal was scored against his team, Lackenby lost his temper and directed that anger at Ruby. She was 5 weeks old, and she was beside him on the sofa. She could not move away. She could not protect herself. She had no means of understanding what was happening or why. When Gemma Coates came downstairs, she found Ruby in a state of medical distress. Emergency services were called. When paramedics arrived at the house and asked what had happened, they needed an accurate account to give Ruby the best possible chance of appropriate treatment. Lackenby told them she had simply stopped breathing. He said nothing about an injury, nothing about what had happened during the match. The paramedics treated Ruby based on the information they were given. It was a lie that may have cost her the last chance of any meaningful medical intervention. Ruby was taken first to Barnsley Hospital and then transferred to Sheffield Children's Hospital, where specialists attempted to treat her brain injury. The injury was not survivable. 24 hours after she was admitted, the decision was made to switch off the machines that were keeping her alive. She was 5.5 weeks old. The investigation into Ruby's death was led by Detective Chief Inspector Sean Middleton of South Yorkshire Police. Lackenby and Gemma Coates were not arrested immediately. They were arrested in July 2011, 5 months after Ruby's death, and were charged in January 2012. The trial did not begin until early 2013, nearly 2 years after the night of the 16th of February. The case against Lackenby rested on several categories of evidence. The first was medical and forensic evidence relating to Ruby's injuries. The nature and pattern of the injuries she sustained were examined by medical experts during the trial. The evidence established that her brain injury was consistent with forceful shaking, a form of harm that causes the brain to move violently within the skull and results in bleeding, swelling, and catastrophic neurological damage. The injury was not consistent with Ruby simply stopping breathing, as Lackenby had told paramedics. It was consistent with a deliberate and forceful act carried out by an adult. The second strand of evidence related to the prior injuries. The fractures to Ruby's ribs, identified during an earlier medical examination, were assessed by experts as having been caused by an external force applied to her chest. Rib fractures of this kind in infants are a recognized indicator of non-accidental injury. They do not typically arise from ordinary handling, even clumsy or inexperienced handling. They require a level of force that goes beyond what could be accidental. The third element was the timeline established by the football match itself. The prosecution was able to place the critical events within a precise window. The match kicked off at 8 minutes past 8. Villa's goal came at 8:11. Ruby was admitted to hospital that night. The sequence of events gave investigators and the jury a framework within which to understand what had happened and when. The fourth element was Lackenby's own behaviour in the immediate aftermath. His false account to paramedics was documented. The CPS made clear that his decision to lie to emergency responders had direct implications for Ruby's treatment, because paramedics could not offer the most appropriate care without knowing the true nature of her injuries. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury, comprising 10 women and 2 men, found Lackenby not guilty of murder, but guilty of manslaughter. They also found him guilty of the separate charge of causing grievous bodily harm in relation to Ruby's fractured ribs. On the charge relating to perverting the course of justice, Gemma Coates was found not guilty. Psychological analysis. The first thing to note is that the harm done to Ruby did not begin on the night of the match. The fractured ribs established that Lackenby had applied harmful force to his daughter on at least one prior occasion. This matters because it tells us that the events of the 16th of February were not a single isolated rupture in an otherwise safe environment. They were part of a pattern, identified clearly by the judge, who described a growing pattern of abusive behavior toward Ruby. Research into infant harm in domestic settings consistently identifies a set of risk factors that appear across cases of this kind. Among them, the stress of a new baby in a household where tensions are already present, a parent with a history of poor impulse control under pressure, a sense of powerlessness or frustration that is redirected toward a target who cannot fight back. Ruby was 5 weeks old. She could cry. She could not explain herself, could not be reasoned with, could not be told to wait. In moments of extreme stress or frustration, that helplessness can, for some adults, become a trigger rather than a call to patience. The specific context of the football match adds a dimension that is unusual, but not, in the landscape of domestic violence research, entirely without precedent. The match represented a financial stake, an emotional investment, and a disruption of an evening that Lackenby had arranged and anticipated. When the outcome he had bet on became unlikely within 3 minutes of the match beginning, that frustration needed somewhere to go. It went to Ruby. The judge drew attention to this directly. He told Lackenby, "That evening you badly lost your temper with this tiny baby and the football simultaneously." That phrasing, chosen carefully in a courtroom setting, captures something important. The football did not cause what happened. Lackenby caused what happened, but the match was the immediate context, and the judge made no effort to separate the two. The second element worth examining is the decision to lie to paramedics. In the immediate aftermath of causing serious injury to his daughter, Lackenby's first observable action was to construct and deliver a false account to emergency responders. This required sufficient presence of mind to formulate a story, sustain it under the pressure of an emergency situation, and maintain it in the presence of medical professionals trying to save his daughter's life. That capacity for deliberate deception in a moment of crisis says something about the degree of self-preservation at work, even as Ruby was being taken away in an ambulance. Mark Lackenby was convicted of manslaughter, not murder. The distinction matters, and it is worth explaining clearly. Murder requires the prosecution to prove that the defendant intended to cause death or serious harm. Manslaughter, by contrast, covers cases where death results from an unlawful act or from gross negligence. Without that specific intent being established to the jury's satisfaction, the jury in this case heard 3 weeks of evidence and concluded that manslaughter, not murder, was the appropriate verdict. That verdict will strike many people as inadequate. a 5-week-old child died from injuries inflicted by her father during a fit of rage. She had already been harmed before that night. He lied to the paramedics who came to treat her, and the sentence handed down was 10 years, meaning that with standard release at the halfway point of a determinate sentence, he could have been considered for release in 5. The question this raises is not purely legal. It is also a question about what a sentence is intended to do, and for whom. For the families of victims in cases like this, a verdict of manslaughter can feel like an institutional failure to name what actually happened. A baby did not simply die, she was harmed, repeatedly, by the person responsible for keeping her safe. The difference between a verdict of murder and one of manslaughter may be legally significant, but it does not change what Ruby experienced or what her death meant. At the same time, the legal framework exists for reasons that go beyond any individual case. The distinction between intent and its absence matters in a system built on precision, about what a person did and what they meant to do. The jury applied that framework and reached their conclusion. What it leaves is a gap between what the law can name and what those left behind are able to accept. That gap is not unique to this case, but it is rarely as stark as it is when the victim is 5 weeks old, and the sentence is measured in years that the victim never had the chance to live. DCI Sean Middleton said after the verdict that the case was a tragic one that had caused a great deal of anguish for Ruby's extended family, and had deeply affected the community of Goldthorpe. He was right on both counts. Those are not words that close anything. They simply acknowledge the shape of what remains. On the 26th of March 2013, at Sheffield Crown Court, Mr. Justice Haddon Cave addressed Mark Lackenby directly before sentencing him. He told him it was frankly despicable and defied belief that anyone could do such a thing to their own baby in such circumstances. He told him that the evening had ended the way it had because he had badly lost his temper with a tiny baby and with a football match at the same time. He told him that what had happened was the result of a nasty outbreak of temper and was part of a growing pattern of behavior toward Ruby. He told him he would have to bear the guilt and the loss of his own child at his own hand. Lackenby wiped tears from his face during the remarks. When the sentence of 10 years was announced, he shook his head slightly. Then, as he was led from the dock, he thanked the judge. He had denied hurting Ruby throughout the proceedings. Gemma Coates, who had faced a charge of perverting the course of justice, was found not guilty. She had lost her daughter. She left the courtroom without that charge attached to her name. But she did not leave without everything else that came with the events of the 16th of February and everything that followed. Ruby Lackenby was 5.5 weeks old. She was born into a home that should have been the safest place in her world. She had a mother, she had a father who, on at least 2 separate occasions, caused her injuries that no infant should ever sustain. She died in a hospital in Sheffield, 24 hours after she was brought in with a brain injury her doctors could not reverse. The night she was harmed, a football match was playing on the television. A bet had been placed. A goal had been scored in the 11th minute that made the bet unwinnable, and a man who had already broken his daughter's ribs directed his frustration at the only person in the room who could not respond, could not run, and could not protect herself. That is what happened in Goldthorpe on the 16th of February 2011. The courts have recorded it. The community has not forgotten it. And Ruby, who had 5 weeks, deserved every year she did not get. If this case has raised concerns for you about child welfare or about how to recognize signs that a child may be at risk, the NSPCC helpline is available 24 hours a day. Further resources are linked in the description below. If you found this video worthwhile, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. The next case will be with you soon.